welcome to the Revolving Change podcast, where we talk about leadership and management in the context of the ever-evolving world we have today. I'm Joanna, a junior coach here at Revolving Change.
I'm Isaac, a junior coach at Revolving Change as well.
And I'm Jorge, the founder of Revolving Change. And some people know me as the dinosaur. So I'm the cause of all this.
Well, I have the pleasure of introducing our topic today. It's one that we've all felt a lot of times, but in our episode today, we're diving into a fundamental emotion that has shaped human behavior since the dawn of time, and that is fear. So originally, fear evolved to protect our ancestors from physical threats, but today fear manifests in our professional and creative lives too, often holding us back from achieving our full potential. We'll explore how fear can inhibit creativity, affect our professional growth, and impact team dynamics. By understanding the evolutionary roots of fear, we can learn how to transform this powerful emotion into a positive force that encourages innovation and growth. So to get us started, Jorge, could you give us some background information on how fear started practically from an evolutionary standpoint so that we wouldn't, let's say, fall into the same hole twice?
I like that. So you want to talk to you when I was a dinosaur. That's okay.
Exactly.
From the beginning of time, yeah. I mean, the way you phrase it.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Good that I have a big head and I have a good memory because all the way back. So we were scared of being eaten alive. So we have this reptilian reaction of the F3Fs. We fight, we flight, or we freeze. When we freeze, we get eaten. When we fight, we have a chance depending on what we're fighting. If you're fighting a dinosaur, you have little chance. So most of the time is you flee. So those reactions are part of our DNA, are part of who we are and what we are. With millennials, we have overcome much of it, but it's the wrong word, overcome. We haven't overcome, we have learned to live with it and to manage it most of the time. And what caused fear at the time and times keeps changing. In old times, the caveman was scared of being eaten alive. The 3Fs applied more than anything else to them. And it has stayed with us as part of our evolution. And we still have the 3Fs. I mean, we all have had the situation where we were frozen in fear, maybe as children or as youngsters or even as adults. So what has become important is to learn to live with and manage fear. Unfortunately, that is done intuitively. So if you're good at it because your intuition helps you change the situation that gives you fear, then you'll be okay. So what we do is we have created courses, we have created content where we help managers realize where fear is and how we manage fear.
I think that's what makes fear so tricky, is that it's an autonomic nervous system response. It's not something that we actually have control over. When it's triggered, it's happening. So 100%. You have to be very emotionally aware of what's going on in yourself to be able to, like you say, overcome that fear and progress through it.
So, now, I think it's a very good point you're raising. Yeah, initially, the first reaction to fear is from the amygdala, right? Like you said, it's spontaneous. You cannot control the reaction. You don't control the feeling, but you can control the reaction. So, correct. Say, for instance, I had it actually 3 days ago where somebody called me and said, I'm terrified. I had a call from my boss, wants to speak with me urgently. So the amygdala just jumped and, this fear came out that I'm going to get fired. I said, why? Why do you say that? What have you done? Nothing. So why would you get fired? Oh, because he is going through a bad patch and he's in a bad mood and blah, 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 blah. I said, well, let's start. I went through the process of dissecting that fear and understanding what the components of it were and understanding what is a theory and what is true, what are facts, what is academically a theory. And she cooled down and eventually we agreed a path. She did what she had to do and called me back an hour later saying, yeah, you were right. There was nothing. It had nothing to do with me. I said, okay. So what did you learn from it, right? So how are we acting and reacting to fear and how are we managing fear? And it's much easier said than done. I remember I'm not necessarily a very fearful person, but our fear goes into different directions, right? Sometimes we have a fear of authority for things because of things that happened in our childhood. We are fear of success, fear of failure that go often hand in hand, like you were mentioning.
Mm.
There's fear of self-discovery. Sometimes people know there's something wrong in the way they're doing things, but they don't want to face it. Why? Because they don't know how to deal with fear. They're scared of the feedback they're going to get. And with feedback, I'm talking about looking at the mirror sometimes, right? For instance, say you had a very short haircut and you don't like your haircut, you don't look at the mirror, right? Or you wear a baseball cap to hide your haircut. Your haircut is wonderful. I say I'm not referring to your haircut, but I'm referring to my haircut. I had very long hair. I'm in a post health situation with cancer and stuff, so I have my hair very long and my beard very long, and I don't like the haircut because I was used to another image, and now I'm in a transition. This change is not fear, but I feel uncomfortable, which borders on fear. So very often discomfort is part of fear. And people
Yeah.
don't realize that, but they just take discomfort as, oh, I just don't feel comfortable. No, you're fearful. And if we would take it as fear and manage it as fear, we'll be a lot more effective of overcoming those
Yeah.
uncomfortable situations.
Considering the effects of fear and creativity, what strategies can you recommend for professionals to overcome their fear of rejection or criticism when they're making something new or have a new idea or want to present it within another step into team formats?
That itself is a mouthful, right? I mean, yeah, all those examples would take us another hour, which we could do, going through each one of them. A junior manager and a senior manager are going to have completely different fears, right? A junior manager is sometimes fearful of getting bullied or getting exposed in front of their colleagues. There's also gender issues where a female will have different fears than a male has, for poor management reasons. So when management is not doing well, it happens. I've seen it in many customers clients having that problem. Also, the reaction of self to fear sometimes is fearful. I don't know how I'm going to react to it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how this is going to work. So doing the ostrich and do nothing and pretend it's not happening is the safest way of all.
Right.
So, you ask a number of things now when people get feedback and the fear of getting feedback. The fear of feedback itself is one of the major issues in business. There's fear in giving feedback. There's fear to get feedback. There's fear to consider feedback, because if I will consider feedback, it might mean that I have to change what I'm doing. It might mean that
Yeah.
I have to step back. It might mean that I have to apologize about something I didn't realize it hurt somebody. So the first step in fear is acknowledge fear. And that is the first most difficult step. That people will resist admitting they're fearful because society, unfortunately, it's a male-female trait often that we male are not the brightest very often. And that's a gross understatement. That we cannot admit that we're fearful. It's beyond our pride to admit that fear exists. We're not scared, because we're talking about fear, but the verb is to be scared, right?
Right.
To be fearful is to be scared, and people don't like to admit that you're scared. A little boy can be scared, but we get scared, and we get scared of things that we understand and don't know how to cope with, but we also get very scared of things that we don't understand. And that's
Right.
where management skills come in making themselves understood, explaining things, communicating, giving feedback, training on identity role, and a number of the skills that we teach. Learning those is how you learn also, along with it, to make fear tangible. Make fear a thing that you can touch, you can manipulate, you can work on, manipulate in a positive sense, you can work on, you can archive, and you can take out whenever it comes back, because fear is often situation dependent. All of a sudden you have to do a presentation. You've never done. The first time I remember did a speech, I won't tell you the way it felt, but it was like when you hum in your pants, right? It was like, I was terrified. I had 150 people. I was in my early 30s. And I was just terrified. And I did well, I'm told. I thought I did terrible because when you're fearful, you think that what you're doing is not good enough. And because it was one
Mm.
of the things that I taught many of my clients so many times when they are facing a fearful situation. I said, well, yeah, but I don't know this and I don't know that, and I'm not sure about this and I'm not sure about that. I said, yeah, who else knows about that? Nobody. So why are you fearful? You're the only one that knows. But it's a mind game that the
Mm.
amygdala is playing with us. So knowing the tricks in a way and the techniques to neutralize and to work with that fear, make it part of what we do. Because actually there's another side to fear, which is extremely important and is often overlooked. Fear is a mechanism of self-preservation.
Right.
Fear is meant to protect us of winding up in the lion's jaw, right?
Yeah.
So when we are fearful of something, it's a sign that we need to go back and check what we're doing, reassure ourselves, verify what we did. And those which are allegedly fearless,
Mm.
actually, they are irresponsible most of the time. Those that drive like crazy, which say they're fearless, well, they crash their car and kill other people, hurt other people, and hurt themselves. So this fearless thing is not necessarily good. So fear is a very healthy mechanism, and the key is to learn to manage the fear. The key is to learn to use fear to your advantage, and not to be scared of fear. You said it earlier. What was it you said about fearing fear?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, to touch one last time on the evolutionary standpoint in terms of what you just said about it creatively, in terms of creative work, fear is also part of why we have memory, right? Like if we're forest hunting something and we fall into a deep hole and break our ankle, and we had no clue why we fell into the ankle, we would be extremely fearful about ever going outside of our safe space and running through a forest again, because our brain holds that memory to tell us you need to fear doing this action because it resulted in a negative outcome that negatively reinforce you to say there's still a threat out there that I haven't quite understood, and there's a risk that I'm going to fall into that same trap again. Because I don't understand how to navigate that, I'm not going to take that activity as much or as often or at all, for example. And that's why what you were saying about repetitive exposure to the thing that you're fearful of is the only way to overcome it, right? Because the more you go out into the forest and the more you look at the holes and the way that the ground is shaped, let's say if we're very primal, I don't know, then we go, okay, now when I see a pile of leaves, I will not go straight through it. I might go around it instead because maybe it's covering something. And I feel like maybe now we can start talking about this in relation to professional life. I have a question for it. One of the biggest factors that holds people back from changing is not knowing how to deal with in the workplace. That often manifests as stress or disengagement within the team, I would say, because nobody wants to take a step, nobody wants to be proactive, everyone's afraid of walking on all these eggshells. So what are some specific ways a leader can create a work environment that not only acknowledges this fear but actively works to reduce its impact, to transform it into something positive that propels people?
That's a very good question. Acknowledging fear is the very first step, and is often the hardest step
Mm.
because, particularly with male clients, the female executives I work with have a tendency to be overly self-critical and over admitting to what they believe are weaknesses, which are not. They're acknowledging their reality and their nature is not worse, but because we men often hide it because we think is detrimental to the perception of us, that we present and pretend to be at a different level, which we are not. We are equally fearful. That's
Mm.
my experience. But admitting is the wrong word because it implies negative. Recognizing and accepting the existing of fear is the very first step. It is a very hard step for many people to take. I love admitting fear because fear, to me and to many of my clients that I have coached over years, they have learned that fear opens a complete new scenario and complete
Right.
new range of opportunities for not only just for self-discovery, but to just try new things, try new approaches. venture into this other forest that we've never been before, like you used, because maybe there are no holes in the ground, but there's a pack of wolves. So we
Yeah.
don't know what the dangers are that we're going to be facing. And that's a reality of business, that we think we are in control, we think we know, but we're not. And
Right.
which is what I love about running businesses, which is what I've done much of my life, is that I love not to be in control. I
Mm.
love the fact that we have these things that come out of the woodwork all of a sudden and shake us up and tear us down sometimes, and it hurts. But that
Mm.
inspires creativity, inspires proactive behavior, right? So, but going back specifically to your question in terms of how we have helped clients, the first thing is acknowledging and recognizing fear. The second is, and it's a multifaceted, when you look at in our website, we have all these beehives with all the skills. For depending on the individual and on the situation, on the business, on the age, because age makes a big difference. But some people have a hard time because they associate seniority with being right, and therefore their fear becomes entrenched into their mind that I cannot admit to a mistake, I cannot admit to a weakness, I cannot admit to having gone off track because I'm scared of the perception people are going to have of me. Fear comes in. So fear is coming into almost everything we do. And unless we are conscious about managing fear and managing our reactions to it,
Mm.
it can dominate, and it can really narrow, it can really hamper our ability to manage and to grow. So I cannot give one answer to your question, but what I can say is overcoming, recognizing the existence of fear and accepting fear as a normal thing and a valuable thing and as an asset. It's an opportunity. I regard fear as an opportunity. It can be a challenge, like it was for me when I decided to go skydiving. It was also when the first time I went to do, I'm a certified rescue diver and I have many other certifications. One of them is shark feeder. I know some people are going to say, "Oh, it doesn't exist." Yes, it does exist. And I remember I wasn't terrified, but I was fearful. And sometimes, and this is one thing that we discuss with senior executives very often, is where does the border between respect and fear lay? Because sometimes you have to be very respectful of something without necessarily being fearful. I'm not fearful of sharks. I'm fearful of being unconscious, of being in a dangerous situation and not recognizing it. That's what I'm fearful of. But I'm not fearful of sharks. If you know how to behave with sharks and in front of sharks in an environment there are sharks, you're going to be safe. But you have to be responsible and you have to be careful. So you have to have respect. But you don't have to be fearful. But that is the evolution of having been fearful before. I mean, the first time I saw a shark, I froze, right? I will never forget that. I was in Belize, and I was looking forward to encountering a shark for the first time. And all of a sudden, I see this gray shadow under me, advancing me. The shark had been behind me and swam under me, and I was like, ah! I mean, I froze. I'm getting goosebumps right now, remembering how I felt that moment. And on that same dive, for the first time, I had a shark coming my way, and I just froze, right? Froze. And I was in fear, but not in panic. So I didn't want to escape. I said, because I had, I mean, I was not alone. We were a pack of divers, of course, right? And I could see this eye-to-eye contact I had with this shark. I mean, it was just phenomenal. It's an amazing experience in life that you have that you never forget. But of course, the shark was looking at me, studying me. So this doesn't look like food. We were rubber anyway, so probably not very tasteful. And he just left. These are reef sharks. They're not great whites. They're not, they are puppies basically. But when you don't know about sharks, it's a shark. But they're not overly dangerous, and they're not, they're not necessarily, they're very rarely lethal, a reef shark. But just to say that how you manage your own fear, right?
Yeah.
So, and you transform fear into respect. You can be fearful of a confrontation, right? You have a manager or a peer that is very aggressive, very possessive, very loud, very energetic, whatever you want, and you're fearful at the beginning. But once you learn that you were taught how to deal with feedback, you were taught how to communicate, how to read nonverbal behavior, you learned about transactional analysis, parent-adult child-like behavior, you learned about identity role, you learn about a number of skills that enrich your the tools you have available to manage, then you will transform that fear into respect. And then you have respect for the person, but the person will also have respect for you because will recognize you have these tools, you know how to manage. And all of a sudden you have this intent, you have this modus operandi between the two, where
Exactly.
you keep that fear of bay away, but you have respect for each other. And that is the next step. So guiding executives, managers, and leaders, entrepreneurs, understanding what is fear, recognizing their own fears, and then developing the skills they need to manage the fear. It's not just overcoming, it's managing the fear to their advantage. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? Because I mean, it was a big question. I'm not sure I even answered it. Did I?
You touched on some parts of it, but what I would love to hear are some
So I
specific
didn't.
leaders can create a work environment that not acknowledges this fear, but actively works to reduce and transform its impact into something positive. Let's say in a meeting, for example, morning meeting, evening review, whatever it may be.
Well, there
Ways.
is no aspirin. There is no aspirin. I'm sorry for interrupting, but there is no
Yeah.
aspirin. There is no quick solution. No, no Swiss knife you can apply it. Okay, now we overcome fear. Managing fear, reacting to fear, provoking fear. Sometimes provoking fear is helpful. Okay, if you
Yeah.
have a very difficult situation, say you have a bad product, and you have customers really barging in and getting very upset, it's a fearful situation. So fear will alert people that now we need to act, now we need to take certain actions, and we need to do certain things to prevent further damage and to control the damage situation. So fear is good, right? So it's an example where fear is not bad, because fear has the negative connotation. But to answer your question, it's a process. You need to build it into the culture of the business. There is no quick aspirin, there is no band-aid, there is no quick. I mean, some consultants out there say they exist and they give you a shot in the arm, and then you think you're doing great, and then the next meeting you have, it all blows up in your face, because there isn't. It's a
Right.
long process. It needs a path. You need to identify first what are the skills, the most predominant skills which are lacking, which are the skills we need further or priority development, and then create a plan and work on those. The very first one is to acknowledge the fear, make everybody understand that everybody recognizes their own fear, and then start with expectations. Another key topic, managing expectations, creating the path to share the expectations on how we're going to deal with fear. What's going to be the outcome? Start here. We are with fear today. How do we want to behave when we are managing fear? And once we have developed that scenario, then we're going to fill in the blanks with what are the skills that we need to learn, and how we're going to do that, and how we're going to exercise them to get where we want to go. So that's
Yeah.
the process. So if somebody tells you, where is the pill against fear? Well, I take pills for lots of stuff, but no, there is no pill against fear.
So you touched on cultural influence. So let's talk about that for a second. And I think to start us off, Joanna has a great question to do with that company culture and how that it can influence fear. So I think the topic for this segment should be, how does a company's culture influence fears in the workplace? And what can be done to improve or reduce negative outworkings of fear that maybe is not yet seen, the impact that it could have? And Joanna's question, I think, starts with a good example of, I believe it's a poor cultural influence on fear, making someone very fearful in the workplace. Is that correct, Joanna?
Yeah. We do have some questions here from people in the real life world that they have asked. And we're going to look into that today, and we're going to see what your answers are regarding that. So first question, why do a lot of managers use fear instead of respect to get work done? If I was living in fear, I would quit, says one manager whose username is anti-work.
It's a very good question, and happens all the time in our client. People stay or people leave, or people get fired, or both. And that is because, and now we're back into the question that I asked you guys a moment ago, that is not part of the culture. Or the culture is using fear negatively, and is not a culture of managing fear to make people grow. So it's used as a whip, it's used as a punishment, it's used as a negative tool to scare people. Fear, scared. People get scared. So there is no feedback mechanisms in place. Communication is one-way communication, probably top-down. Nonverbals are probably very aggressive. Verbals also very short, probably only one way, so nobody checks for understanding. Meetings are probably, I'm running the meeting, so I speak and you all listen. I do, so no proper expectations management. Feedback is, I'm telling you what's wrong with you. That's not feedback, that's, almost punishment. So how do you manage that? Well, it starts with corporate. If top leadership is not human and open and understanding of how culture works and how fear works, and starts promoting a culture that manages fear and runs forward with an example, then people will continue using fear. Now, fear is a way of hiding own self-incompetence. People are often incompetent and they hide their incompetence by being aggressive and instilling fear in other people. Those which are good and recognized are the ones that leave first, because I say, I'm not going to take this from you. So, I'm done, goodbye. If companies don't do exit interviews and don't have a process to manage HR properly or manage human resources, and should have not said HR because that's wrong, human resources properly, then they will not know that this problem is happening. So they keep losing high quality members of their teams, good people, and the fearful people that don't know how to deal with fear are the ones that stay. So imagine what kind of scenario you have. You have somebody instilling fear, and the poor people that don't know how to manage fear stay in the company, and those are your team at the end. So the answer to the question is, yeah, leave the company really quickly, get the hell out of there.
What?
Or we need to talk to, or give us the name of the company, we'll call the CEO and offer them our help.
All right, so let's look at the second question we have here. Our username Banner80 says, I have a fear of managing people. Would a business management course help, or is that just book learning? Do I have to be thrown in the fire to learn myself?
It's a very good question. I think that while formal education gives you a lot of tools and a lot of knowledge, the experience of doing it live, you cannot learn in school. There is have you ever, tried to teach somebody to play tennis with a manual, right? I mean, the book can say a lot of things, but unless you get onto the court and take the racket and some people throw balls at you and you try to hit them, there's no way you're going to learn to play tennis. So there's nothing like jumping into the fire. Yes, it's true. Ideally, you want the fire to be of low temperature and not that it's going to fry you and vaporize you immediately, because that would be a negative experience and not very fruitful. But yes, a management course will help. It will give you some parameters, it will give you some guardrails of what you want. But the reality is that, and I don't want to speak against formal education because, I'm a self-made person, so it would be unqualified to even mention it or criticize it. Although I've been studying and learning my whole life, I know that all of you have a higher education. Still, when you come down to learning how to apply what you learned is a different story. And the circumstances that keep changing all the time, the individuals you're dealing with change. Those individuals change with time and with circumstances also. So you have to be creative, you have to be reactive, you have to be responsive. So answering the question, yes, you have to jump in the fire, but you can focus on learning something which you don't learn in formal education enough, is learning the skills that you need to manage. Those particular skills, you learn to read, you learn to write, you learn to speak, but we never get 1 hour lesson on how to listen. And yet listening skills are so fundamental when you're in business and in private life. Maybe we are listening, we're not understanding, but we have not trained to actively listen. If the senior executives or the executives, the managers, the team does not listen, actively listen, people will stop telling them, will stop sharing, will stop saying, will stop wandering beyond their zones of stability. So you step on the actual skill to grow. But when you can't do that because there were no listening skills available, then you will step back and go into your cocoon and protect yourself from aggression and from fear. and from pain. So learning skills is the answer.
I'd like to add something to your question there as an answer, Joanna, about what is the right ratio between learning and doing in order to actually grow, because that's a very important question, right? We can experience too easily nowadays information overload with the advent of the internet. So it's easy to scroll great reels all day long that you get these little 30-second bite-sized nuggets of great information, but all you're doing is just setting your dopamine system on fire, feeling good for a moment, but then doing nothing and changing nothing. Or you don't learn at all and you keep doing the same thing and wonder why you're not growing. So I think an analogy that really helped me understand how to balance out learning and doing is what I practice in the gym. So first of all, if you think of food, nutrition as knowledge or learning, you want to make sure that you're consuming the right food before you go to the gym. You don't want to eat 10 meals of McDonald's and go to the gym and expect yourself to be able to gain healthy mass. All that's going to happen is you're going to try to get better in the gym, putting in work, stressing yourself out, but then end up with more inflammation, more pain, more physical issues because you're not feeding yourself with the right food, the right nutrition.
And disappointment because you're not changing, you're not improving.
Now, on the flip side, you could have perfect, organic, unprocessed food as your diet every single day, 100%. But at the same time, if you have too much of that food, i.e., you take in too much information and you don't work out, you don't implement, you don't stress, you don't try those things out, then you're going to end up overweight. You're going to become bogged down. You won't have the energy to go to the gym because you're consuming too much. So really the balance comes like you would do with a calorie calculator of sorts, right? How much am I doing? How much do I need to consume? How do I make that ratio result in growth over time? Because if you don't act when you eat lots of healthy food, you're not going to get healthy. If you don't eat properly when you're acting, you're not going to get results. You're just going to get skinny and shrink and get weak and sick. Now, the same is exactly true for learning, right? So you need to be able to digest content and then apply it, see how it worked out for you. Measuring is very important in that aspect, which is something that Revolving Change is very adamant about. Because if you can't measure, like Jorge said quite accurately, putting a number, a dollar value to the cost it's having on your business is a great way to set the basis for measuring, because it gives you something that's tangible, a number that you can look at, just like weight or body mass or skeletal muscle or visceral fat, specifics, right? So I think if you think of it like that, you don't want to overwhelm yourself, you don't want to starve yourself, and you don't want to be too stagnant. It's a constant combination of all that results in growth, just in learning as it does with exercise.
I love your example, and I'd like to add one little dimension to it, which is very important. First of all, the calorie thing, we leave it outside because this is not our topic. And I have a different opinion about calories, but that's a different subject.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
a 2-hour podcast.
I mean, yes. Yeah, but I'm not an expert, but I've been a competition water skier, a scuba diver, and horse jumping, and I've done all kinds of sports my whole life long. And there's one thing that in your equation is very good, but it's not included, which can be the determining factor between success and failure, and that is that what you described depends on us with us. The examples we're talking about is us with the rest of the world. There's the interactions with other people, there's interactions with the environment, there's the impact of outside conditions.
Right.
That renders it extremely complex. So
yeah.
It's simple like you're describing, and I agree with you. However, I will caution the manager to not to go further and start adding and that's where it becomes really complicated, the dimension of, well, how about the people I'm dealing with? Because I can work on myself, but I'm working with another 15 people in my team. And of the 15, I have 15 different characters with different feelings, different reactions. Then we have the impact of the business. Then I have my superiors and I have my peers. I don't want to complicate it more. Just to say there is another dimension to it that needs to be taken into account. But definitely. I like your example. It's a very good example.
One last thing to add, especially on the note of what you just described, is one part that I didn't talk about in exercising is the importance of rest, the importance of deep recovery, because you can train for a while and then do a marathon or a big competition, and then you want to rest for a week afterwards, right? Because you've exerted maximum energy. So I suppose in a similar sense, if you're growing and you're maintaining yourself and you're growing over time gradually with your own skills and maybe even some people on your team, whatever, but then all of a sudden a very stressful event takes place, you need to remind yourself that your mind is like a muscle. And if it's been overwhelmed, overworked, overstressed, like if you do too much muscular hypertrophy where you make it too damaged, right? Then you really need to allow yourself to recover to be able to get back to your average performance levels. Otherwise, you're going to grind yourself down to a halt. And I think that's one thing that's not maybe emphasized enough in most company cultures, at least the ones that I've been in, where it's just this, you're invincible, keep going. Doesn't matter if you're throwing up sick kind of a thing, just show up. Now, there is truth to that to some extent, but in the same sense, you need to rest your mind. And maybe that comes through, at least for me, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Joanna and Jorge as well. When my mind is overwhelmed from what I'm doing, I don't do less work. I do less easy dopamine things like scrolling social media, watching YouTube videos. I try and only get dopamine from sources that require temporary stress to get it, like working out, like cleaning something, right? It's effort in the first part, but then you feel good afterwards. And that helps me to rest my mind as well in many ways.
No, actually,
Joanna?
no. I do absolutely relate with what you said. When I am stressed, I tend to like go and get dopamine elsewhere, like scrolling through and stuff like that. So, a good tension. A lot of people would say balance, but I would like to use the word tension instead, because you could never really get into a 50-50 when it comes to work and life, because it's never 50-50. There's going to be a season in your time where it's sacrificing what you're going to do for your lifestyle has to sacrifice for the thing that you want to achieve. And there will come a time wherein there's a season wherein work is doing so well and you can just, focus more on the quality of your life outside of work. So there has to be that good tension when it comes to work and life be outside of work. But I really like the color that you added by illustrating it through workout and eating healthy and what you feed your body in terms of when you feed your body and practicing your workout. So that actually gives a more vivid example of how to apply what you learn and
Right.
apply learning, and also how you apply it into your workplace when it comes to management.
I like very much your answer, John. I think that's very much on point. And that shows again in our team how the different aspects of it prevail. Because while what you said is true, and there's one course I have run and coaching I've done, which is work-life balance. And you know what I'm saying? Work-life balance doesn't exist. It's baloney. It's a fata morgana. It doesn't exist. It's a question of managing the ups and downs. But that's another topic. And we have coached, particularly when I remember Formula One drivers and tennis players, sports people, particularly with that, they have a major deficit in managing that. But the key is that what you both said has a very strong foundation. There's one aspect you two cannot yet appreciate is when you're leading a team or you're running a business and the buck stops with you like it stops with me, then sometimes the conditions do not allow you to do what you just described to do. I don't have the luxury of telling my clients, well, you know what, I'm overworked and underslept. Tomorrow the session is not going to take place. I cancel it, postpone it. I can't do that. So, in the same way you don't if you have a client you're working with. But we're forgetting that. And sometimes this condition's put in as in what I call the pressure cooker, and we need to get it done, and it's only so many minutes left or so many days, hours left. And there's so many pounds of stuff that we need to work through, and it needs to happen, and we'll do it. And it's no, it's very unhealthy. But yet, I create the best content when I'm under pressure. If I have a lot of time to create content, I don't work well. When I'm under pressure and I create myself an environment of pressure, then I produce better content. I don't know whether my content is always good or is good at all, but the best I can deliver comes under pressure. And I think that while what you both said is academically very, very true, the reality of the matter will change depending on where you are in the organization. Why can I disconnect? I can disconnect, but I have people like you behind me. You have my back. When I fall through the cracks because I didn't sleep, because I'm having other problems, because my health issues come in between, you step in and have my back. And that itself becomes a source of energy for me to continue. So the message here is there's a lot of interactions in a team that make that happen. It's not just each individual measuring what they eat, eating healthy and doing the exercise and cutting off and going looking for their dopamine elsewhere. It's not as simple as that. Academically, you're right, but the reality of the matter is when I'm done or down or both, then you are stepping in and holding it all together and helping me out, or sometimes whistle me back or confronting me, hey, you're behind on this, you haven't delivered that. You do it more often than I wish you had to do it. But that is where the reality is, just to bring another shade to the question, to the answer of that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to say you guys are doing a great job.
Oh. On live, on publicly, you're acknowledging.
Sure, absolutely. And also our sweet colleague behind the screens that is probably cracking up laughing with what we're doing.
Just so you know, this is going to be uploaded publicly.
That's okay. That's good. That's good.
Okay.
We are a team of people that we enjoy working together, and we are human, perfectly imperfect. We're just human.
Right. So here's a question that is very, very interesting that I know a lot of people will relate with. This question is coming from username Brenthures, and he asks, why do I keep sabotaging myself? We all know what self-sabotage is like. It sucks. Maybe I had a good thing going for a couple of days, but then I messed it all up and wiped away all the progress that I made, returning to square one once again. I can't even start a good new habit at all. All day long, it's like I should work out, I should eat better, I shouldn't be on my phone so much, but I don't end up taking any action to make it better. What should I do? I think this ties into a fear of success or a fear of failure, like Isaac was mentioning earlier, because that's quite an interesting thing. So give us your thoughts on this.
Isaac and I had a few conversations on this topic quite a few times.
Yeah.
It's a very, very interesting
Okay,
topic.
so you guys would be really great at answering this then.
No, but we had many exchanges on this particular topic. And but I'm not going to refer to Isaac. I mean, this is personal. I'm going to refer to what I've done coaching clients, and because this is very, very, unfortunately, very common that people commit self-sabotage. One most transparently is the fear of success. People, what about if it works out? Then all of a sudden I have to step out of my zones of comfort and zone of stability. I need to move into another beehive with another skill that I don't have yet. I need to learn the skill and I have to learn on my own. I don't have a coach. I don't have people I can lean on and rely on. So all that is part of it. But I think the key is, and now we're talking on another subject, which is change management, is that if I understood well the question of this person said that they start changing and then they fall back.
Yeah.
So they do right. And that is very, very common. And that is because we try to do too much at the same time and don't take it step by step. So when we are in the situation that we recognize we're sabotaging ourselves, we are not stepping forward, or we do a step forward and 3 steps back. So we keep saying, well, I cannot change. Well, you cannot change because you're trying to change everything at the same time. If you were to break down and make a plan saying, okay, these are the 5, 6, or 10 things, let it be 10 that I want to change. Start by giving yourself a reasonable timeline. You will not change overnight. Behavior is consistent. You need to understand how the process of change will work for you personally. Is it your attitude that's going to change first? You need to change your attitude, your mindset, or you need to change your behavior first, or you need to change both. For some people, you need to change behavior first. There are simple examples like, people didn't want to wear, I mean, you're not familiar with this, but in my days when the seatbelt in the cars came out, and people didn't want to wear a seatbelt because it's oppressing, taking away my freedom. And of course, the fact that you fly off the car and die, I mean, that's part of the freedom you choose to have, but okay, that's another conversation. And what happened is people start getting threatened with a fine. They start getting fined. And then all of a sudden, people start wearing a seatbelt because they were fearful of the fine. They didn't want to spend the money on their fine. So they were coerced basically into changing their behavior until then the attitude followed that people say, hey, wait a minute, seatbelts save lives. It's good to wear a seatbelt. Today, you hardly see anybody not wearing a seatbelt. Well, I'm going to say this carefully because it depends on the culture you're in. In some cultures, there's still a problem with seatbelts. Somebody will say, we have motorcycles, we have no seatbelts. Yeah, I understand that. But the key is that this change, in order not to fall back into it, needs to be broken down in steps. And you do a timeline, and you put the easy steps first. The easiest of all is step number 1. And you work on that only step number 1 until you have visibly managed to do a change. Regardless of what it is, it could be you're going to make your bed in the morning. If you've been in the Army, in the Navy, you know about that. Do your bed and do it right every morning. Well, do it. When you start doing that and you start programming your mind that you will do what you say you're going to do, and then Tony Robbins speaks a lot about that, the determination, the resourcefulness, but determination to do what you said you're going to do. But the problem is many coaches tell you about that and they excite you and they give you all the adrenaline and dopamines and shots in the arm, but then you leave the event and then you're on your own and you don't know how to do it. So when you're coaching clients, when you're coaching executives and managers and leaders on how to do that, you make the list of all the changes they want to do. You take the easiest one first and you work on that change, focusing on the attitudes and behaviors, and you go step by step. And it's going to be a long process. There is no switch. Today I'm light, tomorrow I'm off. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I like that. Because I was about to ask, how do you know which one to choose first? But then you were like, the easiest one first. So I was like, okay.
Break it down.
Success feeds success, right? I mean, you don't want to start with difficult and you're going to fail and then you're going to give up. Yeah. You want to generate success and you want to motivate yourself by being successful.
Yeah.
That's why you choose the easy ones first.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the 1% change that I should do, that I would do if I made it a goal? That it's not, like you say, Jorge, too far out of reach, too far ahead, too great. Maybe you think, oh, I've got to change my whole life in one day, like that guy in the question was saying, Joanna, right? I should stop scrolling on my phone so much. I should be going to the gym. I should, to some extent, that's also positioning yourself. And this comes down to more, I would say, mindset, where you're saying, by saying I should do these things, you're affirming that you're not doing those things, right? So perhaps part of it is changing that I should to I do, I am. Because through that thought process, you can then show up. I am the person who goes to the gym. Now, maybe all you can do is just show up at the gym and then leave, right? Sorry, I keep using fitness analogies, but it just makes sense. Yeah. So for someone who's hesitant to go and work out, the first thing they could do, as stupid as it seems, is just to show up at the gym for 5 minutes and then leave, because then they can affirm truthfully that I am the type of person who wakes up and goes to the gym in the morning. And then over time, they increase the exposure. Right now, they start doing their stretches, then they start doing their workouts. Now, all of a sudden, they don't have to tell themselves that because it becomes a learned habit, autopilot. So I think that's also very true with any habit change. There's a part in the brain, it's actually quite near the amygdala. I can't remember the name of it exactly. But actually, it's this part of the brain that is activated when you deny yourself of instant gratification. So let's say smoking a cigarette. When you say no to that, or when, for example, if you say no to looking at your phone first thing in the morning, even though you reach for it, you put it back down, this part of the brain goes, whoa, I've got strength. And just like a muscle, the more you can say no and get that benefit of doing the right thing instead of doing the wrong thing that you're about to do on autopilot most of the time, that part gets stronger and it becomes easier to do that progressively over time. And that comes back to repetitive incremental exposure to something that you're fearful of overcomes the fear eventually in the end. Or you could also say that that's gradual exposure to the truth, where if you don't think that you're successful, but you take steps as what a successful person would do, you rewire that thought process to now you just do what a successful person does, which is not waste time or whatever it may be for you in your specific situation. So yeah.
Yeah, there's one key element missing in what we're saying, which I think is extremely important. And there's a difference, which is going to make a difference between success and failure. Because I told you what I did and how I quit smoking, and I told you I was running around with my cigarettes and my lighter in my pocket, and I didn't smoke because I didn't want to smoke, right? So that was
Right.
my dilemma. I didn't tell anybody that I was quitting, so I didn't have any people nagging me, hey, you were going to quit, and blah, blah, blah. There's one key element that we're not talking about, which is fundamental, without which we're not going to succeed, and that is you need to have a plan. It doesn't happen just, by going to the gym without a plan. If I made a plan that I'm going to start going to the gym and for the first 3 days, I'm going to go in, watch people train and leave again. And on the fourth day, I'm going to start doing something, walking or whatever it is. If we don't have a plan, it's still, chances are it will not work. Let me use an example of sports that you can relate to. I want to run a marathon. I decided that today. So can I go tomorrow and run a marathon? And I haven't been running for the last 5 years? Well, I could, but I'm probably going to make 50 meters and I'm going to drop, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I can go and run a marathon. I'm not going to finish it. And I'm going to scrap my knees and I'm going to be the livestock, but I'm not going to make it. So if I decide I'm going to run a marathon, I need to have a plan. And the plan is I need a date for when the marathon is going to take place.
Mm.
And then I need to know how much I'm going to start increasing my walking, to my running, walking, etc., my condition until I'm capable of running a marathon. So just going to run without having a plan saying I want to run a marathon is incomplete. I still need a plan and I need a
Right.
deadline, because that then is the one that's going to start holding me and it's going to make me confront myself with the fact, well, I have the deadline, I want to meet the deadline, so I better start sticking to what my plan is, because if I don't have a deadline, that plan is going to become like a spaghetti. It's going to be forever, and I will not get there.
Mm.
Okay, so that is what you said is all very true, but you need to add to it, you need a plan.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's
I want to touch on that too. Using fear as a propellant to grow and to succeed. Because you said it yourself earlier, Jorge, you perform best most of the time when you're under pressure. You perform best when you have a deadline and you just got to get it done. It's like do or die kind of a thing. And that is going back to what we talked about in the beginning. In a sense, hijacking the amygdala and the fight or flight response, autonomous nervous system response to our benefit. Because what that does is we take that fear of failure, we go, well, I've got to do this now. The fight or flight, you go into, I'm going to fight in this instance in creative work, right? You do something, you create something. That's the fight, is not running away from it. That's procrastinating. And you enter this flow state of creativity or drive or focus because it's you just have that push to do so. And I think that's maybe more true for guys than it is for girls. I'm generalizing there, but I think that is the case. Us as guys, we don't really want to do something until we absolutely have to. But as soon as we absolutely have to do something, we're more than willing to do it and do it very well. At some cases, like you would say for yourself, Jorge, right? Without sleeping for a couple of days to get something done, if it's important enough, you would do it, even though biologically it doesn't make sense. So I think a lot of it is using deadlines, like you say, as a healthy form of fear to get things done, and not looking at it as something to then run away from, but going, great, now I have this pressure, now I really need to get it done. I'm going to push myself into it and do it. And perhaps you could talk about that, Jorge, in relation to team settings, because it's one thing for me to talk about that for myself, but how could a leader help, let's say myself as someone on his team, help me by creating that healthy pressure with deadlines and positive encouragement or reinforcement or negative reinforcement, perhaps criticism, feedback, to use fear in a way that creates progress through innovation and creativity.
The element here that makes a difference is the fact that you have a number of people that need to work together, and that makes it very complex. When it's you and yourself, I mean, it's complex enough already.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm talking about you particularly, although maybe I should. No, I'm not. I'm kidding. I think that when you're dealing with a team and you have, depending how cohesive the team is and depending how, okay, I need to make a parenthesis because I don't totally agree with the characterization between men and female because I think it's more a personality thing, personality type indicator than a gender. I've known female executives which are extremely creative and dynamic, and they're a mess, complete mess. They're not structured, and I know also the opposite, right? So I don't fully agree with that. And my experience has been more it's a personality type. Value, also the value system plays a big role. However, I'm reluctant to use fear because the fear is not the deadline, okay? The fear is the consequence of missing the deadline. Predictable consequence. One of the things I often work very deeply with executives is use expectations, but use expectations with predictable consequences for good and for bad. What happens when we meet our expectations? What happens when we miss our expectations? Because that renders, and we go back to the essence, renders it all measurable. Because measurable can be you have a bonus in money, or you get a day off, or you get a voucher to take your family to a park, whatever it is, right? Or you need to work overtime and no pay. I don't know, whatever the consequence is going to be. But the predictable consequence is so important and is so much overlooked in how management acts. Going back to this example, we have a team, we have a project, we're running behind, we're running over budget, and the deadline is looming. Well, I mean, there has to be a predictable consequence, but it should have been set from the very beginning, from the onset. If we miss the deadline, we're going to miss this project, we're going to lose $1 million project. Or we're going to lose this major corporate ABC corporation as a customer, which means we're going to lose jobs, which means some of us are not going to be around. I mean, that is a very clear, fearful potential consequence of not doing what we said we're going to do in the time frame we said we're going to do. Now, it works well and it works bad. Some people cannot handle the stress. They're going to crack up and they're going to start making mistakes, so they're going to quit. Okay, not everybody copes equally well or the same way with that kind of pressure. And I'm calling it pressure because fear is pressure, right? So going back to your question, how we deal with the team, I think that's going to depend on the composition of the team. It will depend on the predictable consequence. So it's very academically, we could go now through different examples. It would take us a bit too long, but you could say if the consequence is dire, which means we are in a situation where we're going to be losing business, we're going to have to let people go, we're going to maybe have to shrink the company and move premises or close a location, that has a massive impact. And there you need a lot of leadership and a lot of teamwork, but you need a manager that is capable of keeping the team together. And this is not easy to do when you're under such pressure, because you need to, well, now we're talking about leadership skills, right? It's another topic that we work very much with our clients. How you're going to be a leader in dire straits when you're really in the pits. Because it's very easy to be a leader when things are going extremely well. Now, when the ish hits the fan, it's really bad. Then how do you manage? How do you keep morale? How do you motivate people? That's another set of skills. So there is no one answer to your question. There's several answers because it's back to my kaleidoscope. Every turn you give, it's a different image, which requires a different set of actions for it to work.
Right. Well, that's one common theme I've definitely gotten out of this conversation, is that there is no one size fits all response or solution to anything to do with fear, because it is so personal. And the best place to start is learning the groundwork, fundamental skills, like you've been repeating quite a few times now: communication, feedback skills, expectations management. So I think if you start by exploring those steps, and it gives you a better chance to see where you're most lacking and how you can most benefit from growing. And as you say, go through them all, but then end back up in the beginning, but on a new level, on an improved level. And that's pretty cool.
One
Joanna,
thing we don't stress enough is predictable consequences. One thing that we have to stress more and more and more, because everything we do, everything should have a predictable consequence. Everything we do. And it doesn't.
yeah, that's a good point. I've noticed that for myself too. When I've had predictable consequences, i.e., if I succeed, this is what happens. If I fail, this is what happens. The predictable consequences actually take away the fear of failure in terms of inaction. For me, just for myself, I can only speak for myself in this case, but it seems to me that knowing that if I fail, this will happen, there's no ambiguity or exacerbated fear of, oh my word, what's going to happen? What's the reaction going to be? Who's going to be upset? No, it's like, no, let's say, for instance, back when I was working in a BPO, if I'm late by 5 minutes, I lose X amount. And if I'm late by 50 minutes, I lose X amount. And you know that when that happens, you're not going to get in trouble. But if you do it repeatedly, consecutively, then this is what happens. Do you have another question to go through? Is that it?
That's actually a last question that this is my question actually. You pointed out earlier, Jorge, that the first step is to identify the fear and acknowledge the fear. But my question for you is, how would you know that it's actually fear that's stopping you?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. I wish you had asked me before so I can prepare myself. That's a tough one. Because it is very hard to do, because very often those which are in fear are also negating the fact that they're in fear, because being in fear is being perceived as something negative about oneself. I cannot be in fear. I'm not scared of anything. Of course I'm not scared. I mean, how many times have we heard people say, no, of course I'm not scared? Well, they're shaking like a leaf, right? So it will come down to your self-honesty. If you're not honest with yourself and you look in the mirror and you pretend not to be scared when you are less, then there is nothing the best coach in the world can do. I mean, I can be the mirror, which is what I often am with our one-on-one senior executives, and I'll be the mirror and reflecting the way they behave to try to let them see, if they are in fear, that they are in fear. But I will let them see it themselves. Now, how do you know you're in fear? Well, either you're going to be open enough and mature and sincere enough to recognize, the reason I'm not going forward on this, the reason I'm not confronting my subordinates, the reason I'm not confronting my boss or going to my peer and ask for help, is because I don't know how to, and I don't know how to because I'm scared, or I'm scared because I don't know how to. It doesn't matter which one comes first, because at the end of the day, the conclusion is the same. I need to learn a skill. But it will come down to the individual. And it's a very unsatisfactory answer that I'm giving you. I know that. But I have in the years I've been around, which have been quite a few, have not come up with a key, a switch that will say, okay, now when I flip the switch, people will recognize they are in fear. Often we will dissect that and we will draw it out of a trainee, a coachee in one-on-one meetings as we get into the conversation and we start discussing what you find difficult to do. And they start telling you, well, I find difficult to confront non-performance. I find it difficult to terminate an employee. I find it difficult to go to my boss and ask a question. And you start elaborating, drilling into each one of these, like, well, what do you feel? And they're going to start telling you, I feel nervous, I feel anxious. And from there, you need to drive it to, it is a fear. But it doesn't matter. You can call it anxiety, right? You can call it insecurity. Sometimes the word fear, it will create a negative self-reaction saying, well, I'm not in fear. I'm just anxious. Call it anxious, if that makes you happy. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. When you're anxious about confrontation, you're anxious about giving, receiving, requesting feedback, you're anxious about setting expectations or confronting missed expectations. Whatever you are anxious about, it comes down to fear at the end of the day. But it can be called anxiety, and that's a much easier word for many people to cope with.
Those are very helpful insights, especially that labeling them not as fear but anxiety would be a very good stepping stone. Because again, fear has a negative connotation.
Connotation absolutely does.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Hence, if you would make a course now, how to deal with anxiety, they would say, well, are you a psychologist? No, you're not. Well, then you don't know how to deal with anxiety. You're talking about dealing with fear, and people will listen to what we have to say. And it's the same thing, okay? We're not going into psychology, or we do use in psychology, but we're not certified psychologists. We're using hands-on experience of having managed these situations over decades in different cultures, 25 countries, in 7 languages, 6 languages. But still, at the end of the day, like you said, it's 100%. It has this negative connotation. But the fact that it has a negative connotation will attract people to want to deal with it. Fear. Whereas anxiety, no, that's a clinical condition.
I got it. I got it. Well, actually, that was a very, very rich conversation about fear. And it seems like we can go down this rabbit hole because there's a lot more things to talk about when it comes to fear. So that is going to be more. So this won't be the last that everyone will be hearing about this topic because we're going to dive deep into this topic and more specific subtopics in the coming days to come. In the days to come. But I do want to encourage everyone to send in questions that they have. If they do have any other questions like that, you can visit our website at www.revolvingchange.com or our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or even LinkedIn with the handle revolving change anytime you would like. Any last words, Isaac, Jorge, about our topic today?
Okay, I'll wrap up with, and I'm going to move away from the topic in itself. That, and our memberships, people get access to us, get access to a forum where these questions are reviewed on a regular intervals live, like we're doing today, so they can ask their questions. Depending on the level of membership, they answer questions or can listen only to answers without necessarily asking questions. But this is going to be very useful for many managers and leaders that want to hear what others are going through. And I think it's very rich when the cross-pollination is phenomenal when you hear managers talk about their situations, sometimes in the same industry or similar industries, but the problems are very, very similar. So I'll encourage our friends and not yet members to join us to get more content and more input that will help them in their day-to-day job.
Yes, that is absolutely true. If you want to check out our memberships, you can go to www.revolvingchange.com/memberships. We kept it simple for everyone to hear. So we are going to catch everyone again next time. This has been the Revolving Change podcast, and speaking with you today was Joanna, Isaac, and Jorge, and we want to see you all next time. Bye.